All right, so tonight's presenters are Eric Haesloop. He is here virtually. He is hopefully that will be smooth. Robert Swatt, FAIA, Anni Tilt, and Richard Fernau could not make it tonight. He used the excuse of being in Japan not to show up. And I think his voice will be missed. His love of vernacular architecture and green architecture would have been really wonderful to hear. So I'm going to start with Eric Haesloop. He started with William Turnbull Associates in 1985 and now leads TGH, which is Turnbull, Griffith, and Haesloop. He's been known, their work is known for this blending of architecture and landscape. And they've had some amazing sites to work on to really embrace this. And but when you really experience their buildings, it's just really beautiful, unique architecture too, just really great spaces. So I think it's a unique blend of those. Bob Swatt, you started your firm in 1975, which has now become Swatt Myers in Emeryville. And been published many times, you've taught, and just keeping up with well-crafted, well-sited buildings. And as you mentioned, the buildings just keep on growing. The houses keep getting bigger and bigger, and your expertise and precision to be able to really pull off beautiful architecture in those different scales is really admirable. Anni Tilt of Anni Tilt Architects. You are always blending this idea of architecture, engineering, and ecology, and that's a really exciting thing. I really appreciate the way you continue to push the conversation of sustainability while still making really beautiful, unique spaces. So thank you for being here, all of you. And tonight's moderator is Devi Dutta-Choudhury. She has her own firm doing multifamily and single-family housing. She was also been active in the AA space for a long period of time and was the president during COVID. Sorry about that. The board of directors. And she recently has published this book, Houses to Homes, which is really an interactive book about how to start that process and go through the process of starting building a house. So I think you're a perfect moderator for tonight. And I look forward to seeing how this all gets negotiated. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah. Are we starting with the presentations? Only just like welcome everyone, and I wanted to thank Brian and the AIA for having this series. I think it's important, and people always ask like, what does the AIA do? And this is an example of the good they do. So thank you. I'm honored to talk to these luminaries of Bay Area design. And I have a few questions after the presentations that I hope will lead to like a discussion more than just like answering what I say. And I structured it as kind of past, present, and future of your firms of architecture, single family homes. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Eric.
Okay.
Yeah, how do we get perfect, thank you.
You all see something here?
Can anybody hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Sort of.
Okay, great. All right, terrific. Well, my apologies for not being there in person, but I was just on a trip and I brought back COVID as a souvenir. And so I just don't want to pass it on to anybody. So anyway, so my apologies for not being there in person, but anyway, well, I think just since I'm starting off, the one thing I think, that's so interesting about residential design is thinking about residential design in the context of the Bay Area and California larger, that there's just this incredibly rich tradition of residential design. And you can take that back. There are any number of veins that one could go back to, but just thinking obviously of the extremely prolific Julia Morgan or Maybeck, which is Berkeley, often associated with Berkeley and Worcester. And for me, it obviously, having been able to work with Bill Turnbull and Mary Griffin and I continued the firm. that, our direct lineage goes back to MLTW and the work that Bill did with Donlin and Charles Moore and Dick Whitaker. And it's really part of the DNA of our firm, if you will. And so the thing that is so interesting, the other piece is that a lot of residential architecture is very personal, both with the clients and the architects. There's a very direct imprint. And so part of when with Bill's very untimely death in 1997, it was, after all, called William Turnbull Associates. And Mary Griffin and I had to think about what we wanted to do with the firm and how we might start to shape it in our voice. And that was a real challenge. And I think if we go to the next slide, next image, that one of the things that's interesting about as you practice over time is that the codes change, the way we look at things change, the very definition of sustainability, which I think Annie will probably talk about in more detail, but it's really changed a lot over time. And so one of the very first projects after Bill passed away that Mary and I worked on was this project out at Stinson Beach. And what was interesting about it is that it touched on things like resilience. What does it mean? And you can see the upper right image, the San Andreas Fault cuts right through Stinson Beach, right? And so this idea, and also William Worcester's house was right next door, which is that lower brown shingle house. And that was before FEMA, before there were things like tsunami awareness. And so as architects, we're always having to sort of stretch and think about how to work with some of the newer codes and some of the newer things we're finding out. And so with this, we were able to develop a special structural system, which then started to give a voice and a shape to the house. And you can see the bottom right, there's a detail of this X bracing, which was all about the house floating and shifting and trying to express where it was about the place. So how it was made contributed to where it is being made. The next slide. And the other thing, over the years, our firm is typically, we've been very fortunate, I think, in that we've had off and on, we've had sort of work at the Sea Ranch, and that's gone in spurts. It hasn't always been continuous, but one of the big changes was, if you look at the original Sea Ranch dwellings, they're often the first house in this meadow. And by the time Mary and I started looking at projects at the Sea Ranch, we were often the last project that was filling in on the bluff. And when we came to this site, each neighbor had mown sort of all around, and there was this tiny strip of grass in the middle. And so we came up with this strategy of actually pulling the house apart. Next. And so with the idea that rather than just putting an object in the middle of the site, that we would actually start to use the house to frame the views and in fact create the sense of a meadow, even though we were sort of 5 feet off of each house on either side. Next. And this is sort of this idea of really starting to use the site and figuring out ways to enhance the lives of the people that are going to live on this site. And in this case, it was for a family from Napa, and they were totally liked the idea of the master bedroom being across an open deck. And so we were able to make the outside, really the deck is the center of the site, and it's the center of the house. And the house will become a frame, if you will, or an edge to the site. I think the next slide. And over time, I think particularly for us, what it means to build sort of in an energy efficient and responsible way, it keeps evolving. And this was a chance where we had, it was for a young family that I knew, and they were interested in doing a LEED Platinum house, which we did. And I was kind of interested in taking this iconic barn form and really pushing that so that it kind of, at first glance, it's very familiar, but at second glance, there's all sorts of things that are slightly different and changed, but it still sits really comfortably in the landscape. And you can see on the diagram on the right, it was the luxury of having this 160-acre site. And it was about having a small building that sat gracefully and sort of settled in comfortably in this sort of little mini valley, if you will. And we did the landscape with Ron Lutzko, and that was great because he really sort of had a restrained hand as well, which worked so well with the architecture. Next. And again, the idea that a building can both innovate and refine, but also be really comfortable and familiar, was something that was really important to me on this project. And so it's spatially, it's actually inside, it's a very modern house, the way it's pulled apart and opens up and so forth, but in the way it works with daylight. But on the outside, it has this really comfortable repose with the land. And so that was something that we've explored on a lot of projects, but I just, for discussion purposes, wanted to touch on that. I think it's an important point. Then if we go to the next image. So this actually has two purposes, this image. And I think the first one is that I have a fairly small office, which is about, actually there's another person, Yan, that's not in this image because she's working from England. But without a really good team, none of these projects would be possible. So without Sarah and Jewel and Matt and Andre and actually Matthew and Yan, and they've all been, we've worked together for quite a while. And so that, when you think in the context of residential architecture too, it's so detail oriented that having a really good team pulled together is absolutely critical. And so I feel incredibly fortunate to have the team that we do. This is a small project. It's unusual. I put it in because it's in Berkeley, it's in East Bay, and it's in my backyard. So it was bigger on budget. And so I was prefabricated and SIPS panels and all of those. And it actually worked really nicely. Anyway, that sort of, again, this idea of both thinking about the site and this outdoor space, primary site, and then the idea of building is quiet, but very sighted. How we make reinforce this idea. Next. And that little building actually led to this is another Sea Ranch project. It's called Skyfall. And one of the other things that we've been dealing with a lot recently is fire hardening, if you will, or fire safety is another word that's used. Fire is just a very real issue in pretty much the entire West. And so all of these buildings are basically looking at ways of doing fire hardening, if you will. And in this case, because it was at the Sea Ranch, it was a fairly difficult design approval process because it was a new material for them. And so, but they did approve it, and now everybody likes it, but it wasn't easy getting there. So sometimes it's worth kind of pushing on something. It seemed like an important thing to start to introduce some more fire safe materials and ways about thinking about fire safe construction at the Sea Ranch. And also the other thing that this project illustrates, which is something that's interested me a lot, is sort of trying to get a variety of spaces with a minimal amount of moves, so that by pulling the building apart, it creates this really beautiful courtyard. And then on the inside, by just very carefully using cabinets to sort of frame the kitchen, dining, and living. And it was a way of bringing some warmth into what was a very economical house, actually. So that is Skyfall, and I'll go to one more image just to keep things fairly brief. So this was a project in Carmel Valley, and I wouldn't have said it's a large house, but since Bob Swatt's on the panel, I think well, it's a medium-sized house. How's that? So, but anyway, it's in Carmel Valley, and one of the things that I was interested in, so we've done a few sprayed earth houses, and they're kind of tricky to do because you never know how good the soil is going to be till you actually get it out and test it and dig a big hole. And we had some surprises on this one, but what was interesting was this idea about sort of taking the extension of working with the site in terms of siting and site diagram and the gestures, and actually extending that to something that, actually using dirt from the site to build the house. And that was something that was very appealing. Actually, a contractor told me that the original Sea Ranch buildings, they literally milled the wood right down at Salt Point and then just brought it up like a day after it was milled. But obviously we have not had that experience of using local timber or that local, but the idea of using dirt from the site was I think really interesting. And this is our fourth sprayed earth project. But it's not very scalable. It kind of has to stay in the custom house range. I think it's pretty expensive. And then finally, I have just one more quick image to leave you with, which is that I think for me and for our small practice, and that what Mary and I were looking at over the years is to really find the right answer and something that would both enhance the experience of being on the land, but also to do it in a way that settles in gracefully over time. And timeless is kind of a big word to bandy about, but sort of a timeless quality to it, that it settles in gracefully. And so that's really been one of our guiding mantras, if you will. But I'll leave it at that, and then we can open it up for questions later. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Bob is up next.
Okay. The first thing are we moving ahead now? Okay, the first thing I'd like to say is, Eric, that last slide is so beautiful.
Hang on, gotta get him.
Yeah.
Try that. Can you hear us, Eric?
I think you'll do it.
Do I need to stop? Do I need to do something on my end, or?
But can you
Can
hear
you
us?
hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
You did. I'm gonna try this. Okay. Eric, can you hear us now?
I can hear you. Yeah.
I think it's coming.
I know, well, we'll see. Hear you. Okay.
Okay, well, the first thing I want to say before I start is, Eric, that last slide is really, really beautiful. Congratulations. It's a beautiful image. And the word timeless is also wonderful, and it's a word that we use a lot. And so with that, I think I'll start. So I'm Bob Swatt. The firm that I work with and own is Swatt Myers Architects. We're in Emeryville. We're a 16-person firm. A very large proportion of the work that we do is residential by choice, because just absolutely love to do homes. So I'm going to start with a little background information, because the background actually has a lot to do with who I am and how I design. So the shot on the left is what LA looked like when I was growing up there. So it was filled with smog, but it was still a beautiful place. And that's where I have my earliest sort of experience as a person. The slide right next to it is, it's a storefront. It's at Hollywood and Vine, very important and well-known intersection in Los Angeles. And it's for a store called the Nobby Knit Shop, which was my grandmother's store. And my mother when she was a young girl, worked in the store as well. And I actually worked in the one in Westwood when I was growing up. This was family business, and it was the first women's wear store in Los Angeles and the first women's wear chain. And that sketch is by the architect, who was Rudolf Schindler, 1930. Pretty amazing when I found out that Schindler had designed a project early on in his career for my family. And if anybody doesn't know Schindler, I'm surprised that there'd be anybody who wouldn't know his work. Just look at the slides next to it of the Wolf House in Catalina, and you got a sense for what this architect was capable of. Did amazing, amazing work, and it really affected me before I ever knew about the family connection. The slide on the lower right is Emerson Junior High School, designed by Richard Neutra. I went to school there. Great. And Ray Cappy went there as well, which is interesting because after my first year at UC Berkeley, I met Ray looking for a job in LA. And it was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. And he became a very important mentor to me for my entire professional life, pretty much until he passed a couple of years ago. And I think you can see a lot of Ray Cappy and the work that I try to do. And the slide on the top right is his own house, where we spent many, many days and evenings talking about architecture. So with that, I'll start. I wanted to show one house that is like 30 years old right now. This is my own house. It's in Lafayette. And I did this house in 1995, and I did it. One of the reasons was to build a home for the family, but there was another reason, and that was that the first 20 years of my practice, I had basically started with small projects like most architects start off with. And then I fell into corporate work. And I had one of the best clients in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I loved them. I loved the families that owned them. And I had wonderful, wonderful work with them. And that was Levi Strauss & Company. And I was their consulting architect for 14 years. But at the same time, I also wanted to do the residential work that I grew up around. All that wonderful mid-century work and the work of the masters before them, Schindler and Neutra and others, Greg Gang, and so wonderful work that I'd seen and been so impressed with. That's what I wanted to do. So in 1995, I realized that I was being typecast as a corporate architect. And I wanted to move into residential, and the only way I could do it at that time was to build a house. And we'll see if that would help get that part of the career going. So we bought some land in Lafayette. We moved from the Rockridge area after the Berkeley fire. And before I started designing this, before we actually had the land, I really did some soul searching on what kind of architect did I want to be and what kind of architecture did I want to do. And at that time, there were a lot of homes being built. It was right after the big, huge Oakland Berkeley fire. And there was a lot of trendy stuff. There was a lot of stuff like of the moment, a lot of stuff that was kind of fads and trendy work. And I even did one, and I was unhappy with it. I was unhappy with that building. The only time I've ever done something that I was really not, I didn't really love. And so I did some soul searching, and I decided the last thing I want to do is something trendy. The last thing I want to do is try to be cutting edge to be cutting edge. And I wanted to do timeless work, or at least in my view, timeless work. And so I thought about what does timeless work mean? And I came up with three things. There's nothing really earth-shattering about these three things, but there are three ideas that are principles of what I consider good modern West Coast architecture that have stayed with me for all these years and affect everything that I do. So the first one is working with land, okay? And Eric already talked about that, and he's a master of it. But for me, working with land is getting the building to feel like it wants to be there. So that when you see it, you say, aha, that's perfect on this site. And I can't see that building anywhere else. And I don't want to see anything else but that building on the site because it just fits. And it doesn't mean mimicking the land. And it doesn't mean roofs that mimic the topography of the land. It just means making it work so that when you see it, you get that aha moment. So that was the first principle that's very important to me and to our office. The second one had to do with open planning, and that has to do with informal lifestyles on the West Coast in California. So I believe that fewer doors, fewer walls makes for more interesting architecture, more connections for families. And I actually like open planning that's vertical as well as horizontal. And I think in addition to working for informal family life, it also creates or can create really great spaces and really great spatial experiences. So that's the second one. And the third one is the one that every architect talks about on the West Coast, which is connecting inside and outside. And you do that by transparency and lots of glass. And then you do it, and that's visual. And you do it also physically by having these giant doors that slide or bifold and get out of the way to connect inside and outside. So those are the three principles that I believe that we pulled off pretty well 30 years ago in this house that we still live in, and it becomes sort of the founding principles of all of our residential work. So with that said, we'll go to the next slide. Now, the slides are not supposed to be about projects. They're supposed to be about ideas. That's the way I'm thinking about it. So this is a project that some of you may know. These are little tea houses that we did in Saratoga many years ago. And this shows a relationship to land where the building is not dug into the land, it's not bunkered into the land, doesn't step down the hill, but it still feels connected. It floats, but it floats perfectly above the land. Just a couple steps up, and you move a couple steps up and you are in this, floating above the land. All of the tea houses do the same thing on the site, but they have different relative positions on the hillside. So the look and the feel of those buildings are all a little bit different. But I just wanted to show that working with land doesn't mean necessarily terracing with it or mimicking the contours of the land. So I'll move to the next one and show you a project. This is in Los Altos Hills, and this is a house that does move with land. So this is a home that we finished a few years ago, and the site moves down in two different directions from the entry point to the property. So on the slide on the right, you see the house stepping down the hillside to the east. And the slide on the left, you see the house moving and stepping down the hill to the south. And I think you do, when you see this building, you do get that aha moment where you say, oh yeah, this just fits like a glove. And that was the intent of that project. So that's just a couple of views of building that relate to sites in, I think, interesting ways. This is a home we finished about a year ago, and we do lots of homes. Most architects do homes that have great rooms. But our great rooms often are much more than a great room. And so the great room of this house, this is in Lafayette, right below my own house. This is a space, this great room, which is also the entry. You enter under a bridge, which compresses the space, and then it explodes once you've walked underneath the bridge. But it also connects to living. You can't see it in these shots, but living, to the living area, but also the dining area, the family room, the kitchen area, and upstairs there's a bridge that runs the full length of this great room, and it connects to an open area where there's a connection to a family area, a second family area for children. Children can use both family areas, but they have one on their own level, and it connects. So it's connecting to lots of different spaces, horizontally and vertically. Something that I think, is one of our goals. And the next one is probably maybe our most successful project in terms of just spatial delineation and spatial excitement, I think. And this is the Ouyang house. We finished this about 4 or 5 months ago. It's in Atherton. And this building, Atherton, if you know it, they have ginormous building setbacks. This is not a large site. So we ended up with a postage stamp rectangle as a buildable area. We have very simple plan, but it is layered on the inside. And I think you can see it on the 2 slides on the right. It's layered so that you enter underneath a bridge, very low and compressed. The space explodes. It goes to 2 stories. It has the bridges flying above that connect wings of bedrooms on one side to wings of bedrooms on the other. And above those spaces, it has clear stories. And it has clear stories that you can see the light coming in, but there are also clear stories in the opposite direction, like where the camera is, so that every time you are in that building, you feel light coming in, and very often you can't see where it's coming from. And it just has this magical feeling. You just want to look up and take it all in. And it's a beautiful home. It's a very peaceful home. And it's a beautiful place for artwork, and our clients have a wonderful collection of art. So it's a project that we're very, very proud of. When it was all finished and I stood back and I looked at it, I kind of got shivers because it reminded me a little bit of Paul Rudolph, and that was not intentional at all. But boy, was he a master at layering spaces and creating exciting space. And I just, for some reason, I got that feeling that there was this nice kind of connection to that tradition.
How big is it?
It's about 6,000 square feet.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there was mention about some of the size of our projects. Well, here's the little one. I showed you the tea houses. Here's the little one. So this is about connection of inside and outside. And I could have brought slides of doors, 30-foot openings that slide into pockets and open up inside out. This is a room for remote work. That's what it is. It's in Healdsburg. It's on the property of a home that I designed about 14 years ago. And our clients they work from home. They work together at this one desk in the middle of the space. And the room, that's all it's for. It's for remote work. And it's completely glass. It is lifted off the ground, but it negotiates this hillside and sits actually on top of a water tower, which was a water tank, which was what required for the original building 14 years ago. And it was a little bit unsightly, but it's not anymore because you can't see it, because the building is right over it and it has a trap door so you can get down into it.
That's in the drawing.
See it right there? Yeah. Yes, you can see it in the sketch. Very light, but you can't see it in real life. Okay, but it's there. So I thought that was kind of a nice image of just connecting interior space to nature. And then this is a couple of shots of a home that we did a few years ago up in Sonoma County. This is a retrospect vineyard house, and one of the rooms, I'm not showing you like the primary suite or anything like that, or the living room or dining areas. This is the guest suite. That's all it is. It's the guest suite, but maybe my favorite room of the entire house. It is a little box. It is all glass. It has this very large overhang, so all the glass is protected. It doesn't get very hot. It's very comfortable. And it's just all glass. And in back of it is a solid box. So we have a glass box and a solid box. And the solid box is clad in stone, and that's a closet and the bathroom for the room. And the room is sized for the bed, nothing else. It is a bedroom for a bed. And the bed naturally had to be a nice bed. So we designed it. It's fixed. It can't be moved. It's right in the center of the space. And it is just a lovely space. I've always called it my room, but I've never stayed there. So that's pretty much, what I wanted. So this, I'm talking about connections to the landscape, space, and working with the land. And a couple of projects that are upcoming, that are underway right now. Well, one's underway, one I hope to get started soon. The project on the left is called the Tallwood House. It's in Atherton. And it's one that I am really excited about. It is all concrete and cedar boards and glass, no other material. We could talk about fire retardants and all that, because it's a really, really big issue. And you could not build this in Portola Valley. You couldn't do it. And the building on the right is a little ADU. And that's in Lafayette, right down the street from me. We just started construction about a week ago. It's a simple little pavilion in the garden. It's attached to a pool. They share the same foundation. So they're going to settle together or not settle at all. But it's a 2-bedroom, 2.5 bath ADU that the owners of the main house are moving into. And when it's completed, that's when they're going to move into it. And that's when we'll build the main house. We're redoing the main house, a new home. Very, very exciting, pretty little building that we're very proud of and excited to see built. That's it for me. Thank you.
You just roll? All right. Okay. Maybe. All right. So I'm Anni Tilt with Tilt Architects. I work with my partner and husband, David Arkin, and our crew of, we are 8 to 9, depends on the day. Down in the flats of Berkeley. And this will be a little bit different from the other ones. But I wanted to talk about some principles, and I think this first slide, circumstance, I think both of you have covered this really well, because this is where we start. This is the most exciting part, which is what is the land, but also what is the climate. This particular project is in Nevada, in an incredibly very high elevation, so it is both subject to extreme heat and extreme cold, but also very high winds. But also the circumstance is, who is the client? You know, what are their aspirations? What are their goals? What is their budget? You know, all of those pieces have to come together, and the particularities of that. And I think, you know, we always are trying options, try this and try that, and making a collaboration with the client. And really, if it was a different client on this site, you know, it would not be the same building. So I just kind of want to start with that. And then I just wanted to bring up passive survivability as kind of going beyond the idea of passive solar design, but just thinking about it in the kind of real way of the power goes out and the temperatures are extreme. How is it going to be in that house? It may not be 72 degrees. It might not be perfect. But, you know, relatively comfortable is what we're after. So all of those strategies about shading and bringing in sun in the winter, and actually in this particular project, just siting it so that the little clump of oak trees that was there provided the shade when we wanted it. And actually the husband was from England, so his office got shade pretty much all the time, suited him well. That, you know, that is a kind of a driver, means that even if your solar doesn't work, anything, this is a comfortable house to be in. So this is something we're striving for on all of our projects. Oops. And as we've all been talking about, it's sort of impossible to not talk about being in California, but also in other areas, is the concept of fire resilience. And this project, which is a straw bale project in Napa, was in the Tubbs complex fires in 2017. And the sort of green door that you can see in the middle there has a char mark on it. And some of the plaster, because there was a drain that collected leaves near the house, clearly that burned quite hot, and it changed the color of the plaster, but otherwise the house is completely intact. And some of that was dumb luck, we all know that. But you know, paying attention to that and all of the pieces of that, because as you know, if there's one weak link, that could be what takes away a house, and, you know, God forbid, a life. So this is something we're paying more and more attention to. And then again, we've been working with natural materials since our inception. I think that, you know, we're doing that for many reasons, you know, because they're available, because, you know, it has a lovely feel. It's a healthy environment, particularly straw bale is very acoustic and thermally performs really well. But, you know, more and more we're learning about embodied carbon and the role that it plays in the sort of climate picture. And it's just exciting to think that you can actually store carbon, particularly if we're looking at rapidly renewable materials like straw and bamboo, hemp, those kinds of things. I'm kind of a wood junkie, so it's like wood, yeah, but you know, it takes a long time for a tree to grow. So think about those things. So again, something we're focusing on more and more, even in, you know, at the residential scale and other places. And then this, this is kind of quirky slide, but I just one of the things that we aim to do is make people think about buildings a little bit more and where the materials from those buildings come from, and you know, what can you do with waste products. And this is Randy Hester and Marcia McNally's house, one of our very first projects. And David and I were excited about Bodie. And, you know, what are we gonna do for siding? And this is the picture of Bodie on the left there, where they had used tin cans. You know, they used what they had, which is tin cans. You bang them out and then you put them on the wall and they're still there, you know, 100 years later. And so we tried this experiment with little tin cans. We banged them out and, you know, a couple orange juice caps, and just looked like crap. It did not age well. But Randy grew up in North Carolina, and his high school buddy, Danny Bumpus, was a car dealer, and the car dealers there in North Carolina have to turn in their plates every year. So he had this stash of license plates, and he's like, oh, Danny Bumpus. And then he got excited about collecting them, the different colors. And so I just love that, you know, that it is sort of a quirky thing, but it also has these kind of layers of stories. And then, you know, at the level of the building, having people work on their own building is just a really amazing thing. And the wonderful thing about bale raising, as we call it, like a barn raising, is that it's takes a lot of labor and not a ton of skill. It's something you can learn in a very short amount of time. And so it's a way of bringing together the clients, you know, their friends and their family, and hopefully they've got, you know, a fiddler that can play music, but also our staff, and sometimes their friends. And just you know, you basically transform a house from a frame to you know, like a complete building spatially, and thermally it also changes, and it's just a really amazing experience. And then I wanted to share this project from Pie Ranch that we're working on, that is it's a residential building, but it's also, they use it for their office anyway. And I don't know if you're not familiar with Pie Ranch. It's a farm in Pescadero that does educational outreach and supports apprentice farmers, etc. And they often have work parties anyway. So this project has a solar sand bed floor, and when we were digging the foundations, because of course it is like practically on an earthquake fault, these piers that we built, this soil came up, and it was like, ooh, that looks like good clay. And so we used the site soil and straw and some sand, and we did an earthen floor. Again, it's a lot of work, but it was a great bonding experience, and everyone was smiling the entire time. I mean, you know, during COVID, it was like exciting to see other people. But you know, there's a large part of this is our crew here. You know, kind of a long day's work, completely different than office work, but really quite amazing. And then on the same project, it has this kind of hybrid bale insulated walls, And this is our very first, we call it farmed wall project. Where they actually grew the bales at Pie Ranch. The director of projects is out there on the tractor, and we loaded them up and brought them to the site, and then moisture checked them a little bit. And then they went into the walls with a series of 2 weekends. And then those same walls are then plastered with a clay plaster from the same soil. Again, there's a lot of work. We had people come, you know, just screening the clay and moving things in wheelbarrows and mixing it. And everybody was like, tell me when the next one is. Thrilled to be there. And we, you know, it takes a long time. You can have a bunch of people on a wall. They sit and chat with each other. It was just a really amazing experience. And we shared meals together. And this project's not quite done. It's taking a while. But it's something that we like to build into our projects. And then this again is what that first project, but the client was interested in, you know, all of these technologies, both like operational energy, but also we use site soil. This also has a solar sand bed heating system. And she wanted to demonstrate these things, and you know, you can experiment a little bit more on a residential project, and you know, it took a little longer to build. And so she, you know, her neighbors tell her about their $1,000 a month energy bills, and she said, well, I don't have any energy. I don't pay anything. And they're like, what? So there's that piece of it, but she's also had people from the legislature in Nevada through there, and she's always advocating for it. And it was she's a wonderful client to work with, and be able to integrate all of those things into one house. And then the other end of the scale, and I've probably seen this project before, but is this little straw bale farm worker housing project that we worked on as a prototype. And it's like, yeah, sure, prototype, but I think that there's, you know, with some pushing, and we actually met with people from Next Gen Policy this morning to talk about how to, you know, incentivize the building of healthy, ideally carbon storing buildings at all scales. You know, we have programs in our office where we, this is where you don't do the CA. We do straw bale buildings at $1 per square foot. And we just take it to permit. So the people who ordinarily would not be able to hire an architect can actually get a design that they can work with. And then we make those available online. And so you're buying custom design, not for you, but you know, for a couple $1,000. So that kind of advocacy, you know, we can't do it every day, but I think it's important. And again, having that kind of range of scales is really wonderful. And then I'm just going to end with this slide, which is a little goofy, but we have a family that my grandmother bought in the 50s that has 2 houses on it that was kind of long and complicated, but the land burned in 2017 and the houses burned in 2020. So we're like, well, we're architects. So we built 1 tent cabin. And then this is actually the second tent cabin that we built as a way of being, you know, in this beautiful land, still beautiful. It is actually, you know, what is like the most elemental thing. And it's for us, we actually usually sleep outside. So it was more about bed storage than an indoor bedroom. And then it was important that the dog sleeps inside because otherwise it'd bark all night long. So the side of the cabin rolls up, the bed rolls out, and then you roll it down and the dog is on the inside. And then this is the other picture there is David building the deck. So we used the stump of one of the trees that had to come down. We cut down another dead tree up above and rolled it down and made this little frame, you know, just working with the sort of coming back to that circumstance. Okay, what have we got here? We don't have a lot of money to do this, but you know, I had scoped out this stump some time ago and we had time, you know, it was just a really lovely process. I just wanted to shrink that scale really far down to the elemental. So that's what I've got. And just in the advocate department, I'm just gonna check that up there while we're at it.
Thank you, Angie. I didn't know you did design build. Do you offer that on all your projects?
Yes, for myself.
Well, I wish I'd heard your presentations. I think you answered all my questions. Well, I want to start with the past and how you all got your start and who were your early influences in and outside of architecture. Were there early mentors? You mentioned them a lot in your presentation, or people who helped you or inspired you.
I want to make sure
along
Eric
the
is
way.
on. We can get him.
His picture.
Yeah.
There he is.
Maybe we can
Can you
hit
make it
him.
big?
There you are. Hey, Eric.
Did you
There
hear
we
my
go.
question?
I did. Yeah, I just unmuted myself.
Let's turn
So.
him up.
Let's see, how do we get him? Try again, Eric.
Oh, sure. Did you want me to start or why don't you start?
It's all the way up. Oh. Yeah. We need the glasses. All right, Eric.
Okay, sure. So Debbie, you wanted to start with you were asking about the beginnings?
Yeah, just who were your early influences and mentors, how you got your start, people helped you along the way.
Sure. Well, I think, part of it is, I do think where we grow up has something to do with it. And it's interesting, like I'm first generation American. And I grew up in the Midwest in farm country. And so I think for part of me as a kid, I would go to back to see my grandparents, which was in Europe. And, you'd see all these incredible buildings and places and things. And then I would come back home and it would be, more corn than straw, Annie, but it was sort of like these almost polar things and the freedom that comes with one, which is sort of the open fields, the open sky, and the ability to do sort of almost unconstrained, if you will. And then the other being so very aware of precedent. And so I think for me, precedent has always been really interesting, just that there have been an awful lot of good architects and builders before us, and trying to understand all the things that they've done and the different cultures, what they've done. So, and then I think specifically, I was very lucky. I got to work with Bill Turnbull for 12 years, and that felt like, to me, sort of architecturally kind of coming home when I started working for Bill. That was pretty great. I did actually, Bob and I think both worked for Caesar Pelli at different times. So,
You did my work also, didn't you?
I did
Same here. Yeah.
14 years, but
Anyway, that's not single family. Never mind.
is a single family. I think we did one single family house and it looked like an institution. But But there is something to sort of, you study all these things in school, right? You look at all these great architects and examples and stuff, and it really helps if coming out of school, you get to work with a really good architect. I think that does make a big difference because there is a lot to getting a good building built. It's actually really difficult to get a good building up and running. And so I think the idea of mentorship, of being able to work, whether it's a teacher or ideally in practice, I think is a really useful thing. And I certainly feel that, I mean, I was certainly lucky to start at Caesars, and high rise is one of my thing, but and then obviously working with Bill was an incredible experience. So
Well, maybe I will add, I mean, I had the good fortune of working for Fernau and Hartman for 9 years, maybe something like that. I think that the vernacular piece, I mean, David and I like drive around and look at old funky buildings and it was pulling over and take a picture of a barn or a great elevator or something. So it was definitely a right fit for me. And I think that I learned so much from both Richard and Laura. So that's a very strong piece of it. I mean, your comment about, where you grew up, I grew up in a lot of different countries, but when we were here, we went backpacking a lot, so that kind of outside piece is very strong, I think, in what we do. And then the kind of ecological piece comes from my family for sure. But in terms of architecture, that was pretty strong foundation.
Yeah, when I was looking at all your portfolios, I didn't know you worked for him, but I saw some.
Connection.
Yeah.
I worked there. Uh-huh.
Interesting. Did you have anything to add to your?
Well, I like to say that Bill Turnbull was one of my teachers, one of my early teachers at UC Berkeley, and I loved his class and I loved his work. And I've never known an architect who was better at placing architecture in the land that looked like, boy, did he belong there. He was so good at that. There are other people that meant a lot to me. Caesar Pelli was a very good teacher, even though he was doing high rises and embassies and Tokyo and things like that. I loved working with him. He was a real gentleman and he was a real great teacher. I also learned a lot from Don Olson at UC Berkeley. He was an architect. He was such a good architect, and I don't think that many people knew it, but I knew it. And I also feel that I was very much self-taught. So when I worked with 300 people, the Gruen Associates in LA, and the design department was 30 people, everybody would joke about what everybody would spend their time doing. They their time when they're not in the office, they think about how close could they get glass to the edge of a mullion. And that was their big deal. And except for one guy, and that one guy was me. I used to spend all my time going to Hollywood Hills to see the work of Greg Ain and Ray Cappy and Richard Neutra and Rudolf Schindler. And I just soaked it in. And I soaked it in and just sort of somehow got there.
Hobby shop. That when I saw that, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
That's
okay.
something. That's something. Really amazing.
Well,
Yeah.
again, when I was looking at your work, like your work was different, I think, than the other three, probably because of your LA.
I think it has a lot to do with
rather
it.
than the Bay Area, which is kind of like where I was heading with my next question about the Bay Area traditions of Maybach and Morgan and then Sea Ranch modernism, like those a lot of pitch roofs. You don't do pitch roofs.
No, well, I actually have. I worked on the John Lautner building, or Lautner building that burned down, and I was trying to rebuild it in a very unique way because the owners wanted walls, slope drifts, and all kinds of different directions. But I think there's a tradition in the Bay Area. There's a lot more, and I love Maybach, okay? And I love Julia Morgan architecture. But there's a lot more than that. There was Henry Hill. There was a guy who worked only in steel and did Beverly Thorne. And there were some really great modern architects who were out of that, with that vernacular
Mhm.
in the Bay Area. Now, it wasn't as prevalent as it was in LA, because LA had the architects who came from Austria, and they brought European modernism with them. Bay Area didn't have as much of that, to my knowledge. Maybe I'm off on, I don't know. But still, there was a lot of other work besides Sea Ranch, which was fabulous,
Mhm.
and Maybach and Julie Boyd. There was a lot more than that,
Mhm.
my opinion.
Yeah. Do you think for all of you, your design is kind of representative of a Bay Area style or a Bay Area tradition? Or?
I think so, because I use a lot of wood,
Mhm.
and I use a lot more wood than they would generally use in Los Angeles. And I feel that that's part of what the Bay Area architectural scene is about.
Is wood.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel that way.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Annie or Eric, do you want to add anything?
Eric?
Sure. I mean, I think, look, the nice thing about the Bay Area is there are a lot of influences, right? And so we use the term pretty loosely, but I mean, if you think about sort of part of what's interesting are the traditions that are brought to the Bay Area. And, you know, for example, the Sea Ranch really comes out of Charles and Bill studying with Louis Kahn, which is straight up East Coast sort of, like, you know, it becomes transformed, it becomes associated with the Bay Area. Certainly Worcester, I think of as, you know, being very closely aligned with Oliver Aalto, right? And they were friends. And so you think, well, there's an influence from Finland coming in. I do think there's a strong influence from a lot of the really interesting case study work out of LA that comes up to the Bay Area. And so to me, I think there's a strong ecological awareness as well, which I think the Bay Area has been, I think it's fair to say, has been on the forefront of that for quite a while as well. That even if we don't always live by what we talk about, but certainly there's an awareness of sort of an ecological understanding. So I look at it and I think there's a lot of really interesting traditions. I mean, if you think about, for example, I just worked on a house in Piedmont that was by an architect that worked with Worcester, but he was interested in Japanese houses, and that was his whole, his whole influence. So I think when I think about Bay Area architecture, I mean, I think part of what's so interesting to me is just how broad the set of influences are. That's what I really like about it, is that it's got multiple sort of trees or streams that feed into it.
I just want to add about Maybach that what I find so fascinating about him is that he just like the invention.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, and again, when there was a fire in the hill, it's like, okay, let's try something else with concrete bags and, you know, right. And sort of quirky proportions and funny things. And then there's kind of like experimentation. I think is really fascinating. I don't need to replicate it exactly. We did a little renovation of when Maybach had an addition to it. It's a little studio. And I was like, we're taking out that ceiling and we're going to expose all of that incredible framework in this room, because it is just so amazing just to celebrate it. Again, I mean, I feel like these guys, you know, there's such a broad range.
Yeah, but I think the things I just kind of heard from all of you was like quirky proportions. I think is very true. Yeah. Wood, using a lot of wood, and then the innovation. Like, those are all good Bay Area descriptors. What's the time?
You can open it up.
No, I have more questions. So for the president, talking about current, so all of you have done other work with single family homes. So I'm just wondering how you land on the single family house as your primary focus of your practices instead of the other.
Well, maybe I'll start because I wouldn't call it the primary focus, but I think that probably it is, but we don't think of it that way. Because it's kind of our backbone in some ways. And we're always kind of reaching out and doing these other things. And as I was describing earlier, a lot of them are kind of blended, you know, there's some residential component, but there's also a commercial aspect to it, or it's a nonprofit, or it's got other pieces to it. But I think that, again, I think we do more experimentation in our residential work. Frankly, to be honest, it's easier to get those clients. They come to us.
Yeah.
Right. And the other ones are harder to go after, and we're super busy people. So it's hard to like reach out and do those things. But you know, I think it's, I don't think we would trade it. It's been an amazing process, and we, you know, friends with many of our clients still. As you develop a relationship, you develop a relationship. You have a long working arc together, and which we value really highly.
Well, I was going to answer it. We don't just do houses because we're Swatt Myers, and excuse me, my partner George Myers is probably one of the leading experts, maybe in the world, on any kind of architecture that has something to do with animal care, animal services. So we have projects currently going on in New York, Central Oregon, Bend, Oregon, of course here, Stockton, and we must have 10 or 12, 15 projects going on in his sector of wood. My sector of the wood.
Elephant sanctuary project that
we did not do that. No, but he did. You know, he's done so many I can't count them. I love doing the homes, and as I mentioned earlier, I really wanted to switch from corporate work to doing homes, and I absolutely love it. They joke about me in the office that when a new project comes in, we're getting ready to start it. Bob is like a 4-year-old sitting underneath a Christmas tree opening up a present, and I just never get tired. I just absolutely love it. So I'm glad that that's what I get to do. I feel like a very lucky architect.
Is your animal care work also very modern and
yes,
similar style?
Yes. Yeah. Well, there are connections. I mean, we are one office, and there are aesthetic connections. Sure.
And Eric, what about you? My house.
Well, we've had different mixes over the years, I think. So typically we always did some larger projects as well, like schools. We did the master planning for CDSP. We did some church work. We've done some homeless shelter, the Larkin Street Center. We've tried to do a mix over the years. I think right now what's happened is after the pandemic, I've always liked doing houses. I've just loved doing houses. It's something I've always liked doing.
under the Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we really refocused. And so part of this also I had some health issues that I had to deal with. And so we kind of refocused. I refocused on houses, and I'm doing some consulting on larger projects, working on a 65-room hotel up in St. Helena. And I've always liked having that mix just because I think one informs the other. But right now, currently, we're really focused more on houses than we've ever been. And it's nice. I like it.
Well, that kind of brings me to I have one more. About the future, we have like housing crisis, climate change. Do you think we'll still be building single family homes in the future, and out in the fire? What's going to happen in the houses?
I would add cost of construction.
Yeah.
Because it's out of reach of most people now. Even our tech giant clients are sitting on the fence because costs have accelerated so fast, faster than I've ever seen. And I think it's a real serious issue, and I think it's going to affect the economy of Northern California. And we've been the tech center of the world, and with lots of people with lots of resources. And yet I see people sitting on the fence, worried about what's happening to construction costs, which have gone up about 40% since the beginning of the pandemic.
Yes.
Right? That's 40% in a few years, plus the cost of money for those people who have to borrow money. You know, so I think that that's a really big deal. Obviously, climate change is, will affect everybody without a doubt.
You can add fire insurance to that list.
Fire insurance, I hope you can still get it.
Yeah. I'll sell you the plans for a rollout bed structure. Well, I think that, again, I feel like, well, my attitude is we work with what we've got, right? It's a circumstance. And if the circumstance is we don't need those shopping malls anymore, maybe they get converted to housing, right? Or we don't, I think that if we can be sort of scrappy and not like, oh no, I need that house that that suburban house I grew up with, or that 20,000 square foot thing, that
That'll get chopped up into
maybe 100. But I just think that there's going to be all kinds of modes, and I think we still need cities, we still need farmland. How's it going to work? We might have to do things different. We're just going to have to figure it out. And I think if we can keep training people to figure it out and enjoy the figuring it out, and enjoy the process of making things while they're figuring it out, then we don't have to despair. We can figure out a way to move forward. Eric?
Sure. I mean, I think, look, I agree with those comments. I mean, I think there are a lot of real challenges coming up for architects. I do think the idea of doing single family houses, I would suspect that's going to change over time. I mean, I think it has to change. And we have to think about housing differently. So it's hard to say, because the circumstantial point is really interesting, that this country is such a crossroads in so many ways, at so many levels. And having just come back from, like I was in Germany, and the level of infrastructure there is kind of like mind-boggling compared to here. And for example, train systems, public transit, all of those things that are what you need to enhance the quality of life in a city. And so it's more than housing. There's a whole infrastructure piece that I think is well beyond the scope of what, let's say, in our practices we can really address. And so I think in the near-term future, what I think our jobs as architects are, given the size of the firms we have, the kinds of projects we're doing, is to build as responsibly as possible. I mean, I think that is our immediate task. I think the bigger piece is to continue to advocate for thinking more holistically about cities and how we create spaces within the cities.
Come around in circles here.
Annie, I thought of you guys. Is this working?
You might have to hang on.
Maybe turn that off mute. Mute the screen. There you go. Okay. I thought of you guys last week. That's still not working. I was in the new natural resource building up in Sacramento, and there's like a 40-foot high rammed earth wall in the lobby. And I wondered, did you guys do that? Is it? Yeah. Well, it just made me think of how you scale up what you're doing, because I think I've seen your work more so from the smaller scale. And then when I saw that, I thought, wow, this is coming into huge public buildings. This is fantastic. But then I also think about like, how does it contract and what happens over time? Does it sprawl? Like, does it shrink? So anyway, can you say anything like that?
I mean, I think that, are we still talking about just housing, or we're going broad here? We're going broad, yeah. I think that that the scaling is possible. There are, buildings in China, those round buildings that are all rammed earth. There's actually, something that's actually kind of like straw bale. And they're actually communities that are built, that probably house, do you know, Matt, 50, 100 people, at that scale. And what I think is so exciting is that those kinds of, technologies require people and labor, to bring them together, and to do that at a community scale is super exciting. I mean, we're doing a straw bale sound wall in a park in Sonoma, that we're going to have to get a whole bunch of people to come and help us. But then they'll be forever connected to that item. There, we have a lovely guest. Hello, Martine, who's visiting from France. They are doing all kinds of things with panelized, straw bale. There are 7-story buildings. There are very large buildings of hempcrete. There's all kinds of things out there. It's not the scale that we work at. I don't really want to do big projects. I like smaller projects and smaller details, that piece of it. But there are lots of people doing those things. Yeah, rammed earth, especially those rammed earth panels, pretty much they're lovely and decorative, and some kind of cladding. Yeah.
Hi, this is a question for Annie too. I guess you're everyone's favorite, you're our favorite so far. No offense to you guys. I shouldn't say things like that. Oh my goodness gracious. But
Eric and Bob, you're my favorite.
Yeah. Consolation. No, but as far as timing and the schedule of a project that uses rammed or not rammed earth, uses the straw bale, what does that do to the timing of a project compared to a typical, wood frame, or
you need to build in your bale raising.
Say again.
You need to schedule your bale raising.
Are they always like you build them when you're doing a straw bale?
No, the contractor can do it, but we like this part. So we're actually doing 4. Yeah, I'm doing one on Saturday and one in 2 weeks. And then one later in October and one in November, one in February. This is very unusual. You usually use like 2 a year, but the what you do need to do is you need to make sure you get your bales, because it is a resource that comes from a farm, and they are harvested at certain times. And sometimes in February, you cannot find them if you haven't, pre-ordered them and had them reserved for you. So there's that. Ideally, you don't want, owls nesting in them and all those kinds of things. But you kick the mice out pretty easily. That's not so hard. But other than that, again, there's some coordination in the timing. I mean, it's like any workshop. I don't know if you've done these on your projects before. We did a rammed earth ones once, and you just have to coordinate the timing of it relative to other trades. And I really think the most important thing, I hope to never do a straw bale building with a contractor who is not, they don't have to have done it before, but they have to be at least interested in it. Because if you're fighting them the whole time, no one's going to enjoy it. And then compress it.
I mean, they don't have to do a whole bunch of
no, you got to do plaster work. There's other thing. Yeah. No. never shorter, sometimes longer.
Thank you. This question is for all three of you, but even Annie, for you as well, because what role do you see prefabrication being the future? I say that because I had a Ukrainian company actually before the war reach out to me when I was sort of getting into prefab, and they had this product that was wasn't straw bale, but it was a prefab wall. Sorry?
Eco-cocoon or something?
Possibly. It was a few years ago. I don't
From
remember, but
Lithuania,
they were
close.
basically panelizing straw walls, which
Yeah.
was super interesting. But so I think the question, I think all three of you could
You
could
guys
it
start.
doesn't have to be the straw concept, but just prefab in general, and then maybe that or not that for you.
So we have done prefab. We did the first Simpatico prototype, which is in Emeryville, which is a very successful project. And it was a lot of fun and really nice piece of architecture. And we're doing it today. We have a kind of a venture with Method Homes up in Seattle, and we're doing several homes. We've done one in the South Bay. We're doing work in Nevada right now, under construction right now, 2 buildings. And it's interesting work. There are limitations, size limitations, height limitations, width limitation, whatever you can ship and what you can't ship. You have to connect modules to do that. So we're basically working with, factory constructed modules. That's what Method Homes does. Truck to the site. It's a different kind of design process. You design it differently. You have different kinds of limitations, but you can, if you're careful, save money. Okay, because the cost of a module coming out of their factory is probably in the $400 range for the module itself, not including foundations and the extra site work and all that, but it's about 400. But today, for the kind of quality work that we do today, that same portion of the build of a home is probably twice as much. Okay, so there can be savings. You just have to be careful, watch the site work, simplify your, foundation designs and all that, because it's all going to come into the total cost of the project.
Are you doing it for cost reasons?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we are.
Okay.
But there are other reasons too. Okay. There's a lot of less work at the site, okay, in terms of sensitive neighborhoods and things like that. There are a lot of good reasons. You can do it quicker. You can. But we've had for many, many years, people come to our office who wanted to build homes and couldn't afford it. They become very discouraged when they saw the prices of the work that we do. I don't blame them, but we thought for years and years and years, could we do a really nice prefab building and make a dent in all of that and make it more affordable? And the first Simpatico project, I think, was a really, really great example of that. It saved money. It was very quick. It was installed, basically the modules were installed in 1 day, as opposed to all the time that it takes to site build. And then there were a few workers there that had to actually, make connections between the electrical and the plumbing and this and that from module to module. We had to do the foundation separately, but it was very, very little site work and cost savings. Yeah, so, but the primary reason was to save money for our clients so that more people could build homes or have homes.
Eric?
Yeah, well, so
Hang on. Do this one too. How about that?
does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So the building I built for myself was SIPS panels, which was an exploration in prefab. And I don't know, my experience was a little different. I found that I really liked it for its precision and for the crispness of the way the panels came together. And yes, the panels went up very quickly, but finishing out the building still took a while. And it didn't save me any money. I liked it because it's super energy efficient. There's no studs to transmit energy loss. And then on our remote sites, we've looked at this a lot for prefab, and generally, because I do think it makes a lot of sense on one level. The transportation and the shipping is usually the Achilles heel for prefab still. That you can't really get anything over 35 feet long up Highway 1, for example. You probably wouldn't want to. But so that what happens is in some of the areas that we work, like in Sonoma, Napa, certainly even Carmel Valley, there's still really robust communities of carpenters. And if you look at the cost of framing, the cost of framing a wood framed house it's in the neighborhood of 10% of the construction of the house, 10 to 12% of it. And so, yes, prefab goes up fast, but you still have to finish it. You have to wire it. You have to do. And so for for a custom house, we found that the prefab, it's interesting, but it doesn't pencil out yet. The minute you get into repetition, I think that's different. The minute you get into, we've looked at it for some of our housing projects. I think that's totally different. But for the single family, which is kind of what we're talking about this evening, and I think like Dwell, for example, always has a headline, couple builds beautiful house for 60,000. And you're kind of going, you couldn't even get the sewer hookup for 60,000 in some parts of California. So anyway, the prefab is sort of, I think it's promising, but it continues to be something that people are chasing.
That is one of the keys, is that when you do prefab modules, you need to finish them in the factory. And then it's only buttoning up work that has to happen in the field. And if you can do that, all the plumbing, all the electricity, all the finishes in the factory, there can't be.
Yeah.
No, I'm gonna say something. I just try not to echo too much. We don't do a lot of prefab. We are doing an eco-cocoon project, which again is coming from Lithuania, which seems nuts. But they are trying to start a factory here. We produce a lot of straw in the state. So this is the third or fourth one that in the US that's actually doing it in Palo Alto. But there are a lot of other, I'm just gonna try my notes. Okay, better. There's a lot of other panelized systems. BAMCore is something we're really excited about. I actually think it's fantastic for multifamily housing. It's incredibly strong. And it's basically it's 2 wides of bamboo plywood. You can leave the bamboo plywood as you finish if you want to. I think there's a lot of promise there. It actually comes sort of flat packed. There's Verdant structural engineers working on a straw panel that is basically like a 2x6 wall. It's like a SIP panel, but it's straw based. They're just working on getting the densities of the R value up on the straw. Again, it's the circumstance thing where you really have to, okay, I have a completely different design problem, really, which is both exciting and frustrating, right? We're supposed to be working on a little this Verdant panel tiny house. And it's just like you have to rethink what's a corner look like, how do you get the plumbing, how are you doing all these things. But I think that we need all of those things. And a lot of, again, as I've explained in a lot of our work, I'm really interested in the craft. I'm really interested in getting people involved in building. And so this is a little bit different from that when it's, done in the factory and someone, like people coming out to the site and being a part of it is just, it's magical. We all know that. It's just an incredible experience. But if that's not affordable for everyone, well, let's come up with other solutions. And people have been working on that. So I think there's a role for sure. I would just say that if we can make it a carbon storing role, so much the better rather than foam. Foams are getting better. They are better.
Well, I want to thank you all. Really appreciate Annie. Been a great series. If you do what I say, come to the next one, but I guess you have to wait to 2024 and you have ideas, please forward to Mike or myself and we'll try to make another wonderful series. Thank you.
Thank you for.
Thank you.